All right. Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the second Lunch and Learn that we're hosting in February. And we're excited today about the presentation we'll be receiving from Chief Dennis Rubin and Dr. James Augustine. And I'll tell you a little bit more about them in the intro in a few minutes. It's nice to see our attendance is increasing, and I hope that everyone's finding value in this. At the time, I'll turn the floor over to our president, USA branch, Chief Hannafin.
Thanks, Chief Boutwell. Welcome, everyone. We appreciate you being here. The Lunch and Learn has been a great opportunity. I'd like to thank Chief Boutwell and the education, as well as Becky, our board member, who does a lot of the publication of these. But most importantly, I'd like to thank Chief Rubin and Dr. Augustine. I know both of these gentlemen are outstanding. I know personally are great speakers. So I look forward to it, and I thank them for dedicating their time to it. And I will get out of your way and let the learning begin. So thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it very much.
All right, again, welcome. This is the Lunch and Learn provided by the Institution of Fire Engineering USA branch. As you guys have experienced in the last one, we did receive CPD credit, so you will receive a certificate. I'll put a link in the chat periodically so that you can go to that link and again put your name as you would like for it to show on the certificate, as well as the email you would like to receive the certificate to. This is a disclaimer put out by the UK for IFE for all of our presentations that we have to cover. And without further ado, I want to introduce Dr. James Augustine, Chief Dennis Rubin, both leaders in American Fire Service. Their experience and expertise has been matched by none. Both have contributed to the knowledge and skills and professionalism that has contributed to the safety of people in our profession. Chief Rubin was as chief of Atlanta and DC, and I was fortunate enough that he was presenting at Georgia Fire Academy some years ago. He may not even remember, and I was honored to be able to share a meal with him at night while he was in Georgia doing a presentation, and consider him a mentor. He gave me advice years ago on the direction of my career, and so I'll forever be grateful for that. And so without further ado, we're going to invite our guests for the presentation at this time.
Brian, could I add to that just a minute to help introduce Chief Rubin?
Yes, sir.
Chief Rubin probably remembers what you ate that night and what advice you gave. One of the things about Chief Rubin, he does not forget, and he is always professional in how he does it too. So Chief Rubin, a remarkable memory and a remarkable background. He was coming from Dothan, Alabama, when I met him in Atlanta, Georgia, and then did an outstanding job there and in Washington, D.C. Thanks, Chief Rubin.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's great to watch Chief Boutwell go through the ranks and arrive to the level of fire chief and the great work that he does. But I'd also just quickly mention, Doc, I met you at a hazardous materials call in Atlanta. And boy, we were just pulling people out of that building one after another that had been exposed to chlorine. And I got to watch you roll up your sleeves. And I'd never seen a medical director do the type, quality, and quantity of work that you did that day. Absolutely amazing. I think that became a solid friendship for the rest of our lives. At least I hope. I had a chance to work closely with you in Washington, D.C., where, according to GEMS magazine, and I buy every minute of it, we went from the worst big city organization, EMS-wise, to the first. And again, all because of Dr. Augustine. With that said, what an honor it is. Chief Hannafin, thank you. All the members of the Institution of Fire Engineers, and especially Becky Prince. I don't know if Chief Prince is on the line or able to listen, but probably interacted with her 10 or 12 times to get to today at a minimum. And boy, on one end, she's a slave driver, has high expectations of getting the work done. On the other end, she was very, very nice, polite, and just so supportive. With that said, the presentation that we're going to talk about today is pretty important. And I hope that I can figure out what's how to make this all come together. Let's see if that works. Yeah, there we go. We're going to be talking today, and I'm going to speak about the fire department response. And of course, Doc will be addressing the emergency medical response to carbon monoxide emergencies. I know a lot of folks on this line. I have seen your faces. I've seen your names. I've known you for years and years and years. And I know that you know probably as much as I do, but I hope you would consider this as a good review. And I'm going to throw out a couple of interesting facts and a few other items that may have slipped over the years, and knowing how important it is to understand how to respond to and be effective at carbon monoxide emergencies. Today is going to be a really, really good review. I had a chance to bring Doc to several presentations, both in Washington, D.C., until we convinced him to come onto the team, then in Petersburg, Virginia. So I took this candid picture of him. And then, of course, that's the mandatory U.S. Capitol in the background when you work in Washington, D.C. With that said, the Centers for Disease Control has all kinds of information about this problem on their website. Over 500 people will die in a typical year of carbon monoxide poisoning. And they indicate that that's probably underrepresented. In other words, some folks may have died of carbon monoxide and it wasn't detected, or perhaps there wasn't even an autopsy. And bottom line is, it's a significant problem. There'll be over 50,000 emergency room visits. 44,000 rather will be admitted to hospitals, and about 80,000 emergency responses will occur in a typical year. So CO emergencies is a formidable problem in our communities. The nickname for carbon monoxide poisoning is, of course, the silent killer. We know that it's odorless. We know that it's colorless. We know that it has no taste. So it's very difficult to detect. We have to use atmospheric monitoring equipment to be effective to determine if it's in the atmosphere. It's highly toxic. It has a great affinity to hemoglobin. I'm going to leave that to the doc. He's amazing with that information. A lot of people sometimes don't get the fact that it is also highly explosive. We're going to show you a demonstration of that here in just a little bit. And it's slightly lighter than air. In fact, when you look it up, its vapor density rather is 0.97. So it's just slighter than 1.0, which air has affixed to it. And they tell me that it rises just about to the average person's nose level if you get the point. So again, understanding that is pretty critical. It has a molecular weight of 2008. This is a standard normal house fire. However, the battalion chief's buggy is facing the home, as you can see. Sorry about the picture being a little distorted, but you'll get the idea. Go ahead.
Chief Rubin, we're not getting the PowerPoint. I apologize for interrupting.
That's not for me. That's for Chief Boutwell. How can you fix that, Chief Boutwell? Hello? Because this is a cool picture.
Yeah,
Thanks, Chief.
Chief, if you could go to the share screen, just the share screen icon in the bottom.
Oh boy. Everything ran so good in rehearsal, folks. Okay, so
Good. You have permissions if you just share.
That bar at the bottom is now gone.
Okay, so let's do what, sir? If
I hate technology.
no worries.
Sorry, folks.
We're good.
Hey, Dennis, if you move your mouse over your screen, bar may reappear.
I'm trying my best. I'm moving the mouse like my hair is on fire, and nothing is coming up that looks familiar at all. I see my slides perfectly. I'm getting ready to start the video on the slide. Daggum. The only thing I have is a tiny little box that says Jason Scott. Thank you, Jason Scott, for being there. But I have nothing more as it relates. Go to the bottom. I hit zoom. Nothing.
Maybe on your PowerPoint slide, if you put the cursor over your PowerPoint slide and go towards the top of it.
Yes, sir.
You should pull up the menu bar you need.
And it'll be called shared. I'm telling it to share. I'm telling it to upload. Let me see if that. No idea. Nothing. upload failed. What's new?
I'm working to help resolve it too.
Share screen. Tell me you got it now.
It's coming. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, I don't want to start over and spend a lot of time, but that's the first slide. And then, of course, that's the data that we described. Now it's not advancing. Can you still see it?
Yes, sir.
Good. So again, this is information that we covered. And again, hugely apologize. We're up to the house fire. We're sitting in a battalion buggy across the street from a standard house on fire. This is going to be a backdraft situation. And I think everyone watching will know that, of course, smoke represents fuel. It's got a pretty high level of carbon monoxide in it as well. And between the carbon monoxide and the fuel from the carbonaceous material that's in the smoke, let's see what happens. Pretty standard. This is a typical house fire that we would see. You can tell by the brown smoke that we have a lot of contents burning. Getting pretty much close to burning the actual or starting fire in the actual building as well. But boom, there goes one backdraft, and then there goes the second. Again, understanding that carbon monoxide happens to be highly explosive is an important part in this process. Now, comparing that to this current slide, that was a major fire in a downtown community. As you can see, there's not a lot of incomplete combustion. For the most part, that is pretty complete combustion, in fact, in that there's plenty of oxygen being fed to that fire, quite the reverse of what we just saw a second ago. It is a byproduct typically of the combustion process, and particularly incomplete combustion liberates and spikes the CO gas. CO buildup is a compound by poorly maintained and blocked ventilation systems. When we go on calls, medical crews in the systems that I've worked in typically have a CO monitor attached to their jump bag. Again, I'm going to avoid getting deep into the discussion about EMS responses and leave that to Doc, who's just amazing at that. HVAC efficient features can also be an impactor as well. Sometimes we insulate homes so efficiently, so effectively that the home can't breathe per se, and the carbon monoxide gas that is there can build up. I guess I had clickitis. The first step in the process is begin the information gathering and size up to determine if there's anyone in the home that's experiencing difficulties, to understand if there's any type of open flames in the area that could liberate carbon monoxide. Having worked in several cities where there's a lot of multifamily homes, particularly apartments, as well as row houses, or as maybe some folks might call them townhouses, you have to be careful and consider the homes on either side, as well as the one that may have been reporting, to determine if there in fact is a buildup of the carbon monoxide material. Minimum response is typically one engine and one medic unit. And again, we have to properly place the fire apparatus. I've heard of case studies where the apparatus got a little too close and there was associated problems with that. As you can see in that earlier video clip, when that building essentially exploded, the potential for harm of firefighters or apparatus is critical. Always provide strong command, control, and communications. And of course, that's a class on incident management, incident command system in and of itself. And then we ask you to prepare for entry into the hazard zone. If you don't know, the minimum requirements would be, if you don't know what the atmosphere is, personal protective equipment, along with self-contained breathing apparatus and an air monitoring device to determine exactly what types of gas that you're up against. Next step would be to begin removing the folks that have been exposed and get them back out to fresh air. Hopefully they're ambulatory and can walk, but certainly make sure that we get them away from the hazard. Evidence-based emergency medical care will be coming up next, and request assistance if needed. I've been to events where it ends up being a mass casualty based on the number. The mass casualty protocol that I can remember best is from Washington, D.C. I served as a private, and when I left there, I asked them not to do anything till I came back. And 20 years later, I came back as the chief, and they had obliged. All right, maybe that wasn't as funny as I was hoping it was going to be. But with that said, 9 people or more would indicate to us that it's a mass casualty event. There happened to be exactly 9 level 1 trauma beds in the 4 trauma hospitals in the city. Transport the injured to the appropriate receiving facilities. And again, getting direct information from medical control if it's a mass casualty incident to determine whether they need to go someplace where there's a hyperbaric. But again, I don't want to veer too far. Most air monitors nowadays take a look at carbon monoxide, oxygen, hydrogen, cyanide, hydrogen sulfide, flammabilities, as well as volatile organic compounds. So again, hopefully you'll be able to track those and determine exactly what the problem is. And as we'd mentioned earlier, the carbon monoxide, odorless, colorless, tasteless. So you're going to have an atmospheric monitor if you want to get to the bottom of it. Eliminate all ignition sources in any type of a gas leak situation. That's always a good position to be in. Isolate and control the CO emissions. For instance, if it's a water heater that can be turned off and the gas stopped, if in fact the vent system, the flue system is stopped up. So that would be an example of being able to isolate and control the emissions. Notify external officials and agencies. In particular, if it's the gas company, if it's one of their products, if it's an HVAC, if it's an apartment house project where perhaps there's a maintenance group or crew that can come take a look and get it resolved or fixed. And it would also go to say, if it becomes a situation where you need to notify the hospitals, that would also fall into that category. Ventilate and render the building or area safe. Again, we can only do that through using the atmosphere monitor that we mentioned above. That particular one takes a look at 6 gases. There's some that may look at more. There's some that may look at less, but that's the typical standard that has been used in the departments that I've worked in. And then, of course, terminate the incident, get everything back to normal as close as you can. If in fact you've had to shut down the heating system, and I know some communities, it can get pretty cold. I'm currently living outside of Philadelphia, and it does get into the low 20s at times in the middle of the winter. So making provisions to get that family to a safe and warm place while the repairs are being made is pretty critical. Documentation becomes a big deal, as always, making certain that if you close a valve, it gets locked out and tagged out as well as marked, so no one turns it on except for the gas company in the case that I described earlier. And again, making certain that you take readings from multiple locations, remembering that in this case, carbon monoxide is slightly lighter, but we know that natural gas is much lighter than. But we also know if there's LP gas involved, it's heavier than air. What's my point? You need to make sure that you're taking readings at the floor, at the midpoint, and the ceiling as well. And then you have to track, which has always been a problem for me. I'm going to show you a solution in a little while. And you have to be able to take a look at that over a period of time to understand what the effects are. This is a form that necessity built. I've gone on many incidents where we've had several buildings involved. I can remember one particular one in Washington, D.C. that had been built on a former landfill. Much of the city has had swamp area, and particularly in an area called Swamp Poodle, which is close to the U.S. Capitol. That's right, there is a swamp, or was, in Washington, D.C. And at one time, there was a major hospital there called Providence, and that's where I was born, just a footnote. So with this form, what I can do is write down the time, write down the location, the address maybe, or that it's the address on the second floor. And then I can begin looking at those parameters that I mentioned. The bottom gives us a quick idea of the problems that are going to be caused when we need to start different processes of the gases that are immediately necessary. And if you flip that page over, here's the indicators with carbon monoxide. monoxide, the gas that we're talking about. Normal or fresh air, the background should be at 0 parts per million. At 9 parts per million, that's the long-term exposure limits. A part per million is a very, very small component. In fact, it takes 10,000 parts per million to equal 1% by volume. So you can see that's a pretty minute amount of gas. Possible health effects and long-term exposure, 10 to 24. When we get up into the range of 50 parts per million, it becomes the time where we have to start evacuating. Headaches start at 100, and it kind of goes through that scale. But those two documents, the ability to track, I've seen it done on a matchbook cover or in the back of a battalion buggy on a whiteboard, and it takes 5 minutes to figure out the hen scratch. So this form not only keeps track of where you're at and what you're doing, but it will also be a great addition to your response report, to the incident report that you'll prepare at the end of the event. So again, that you're right on track. If you take a look at the emergency response guidebook, it points you to Action Guide 119. Remember, the emergency action guidebook is our first choice to give us about 30 minutes of operational time before we have to bring in much more heavier weighted documentation, for instance, an IOSH pocket guide and others. But this is typically the item that'll get you through, if you will, a CO look. And again, make sure that it's the current edition. I think the one I have up there is outdated. I know it is. 2020 would be the current. But here's what it says. The health hazard, it's toxic, of course, flammable or explosive. It's flammable. And again, given enough oxygen, given enough heat, given enough material, you saw it explode earlier. Dial 911. Obviously, this is for the citizens. Full personal protective clothing to include respiratory protection, and evacuate 330 feet in all directions. This is all directly out of the book. So with that said, it's telling you about several gases, and this particular gas happens to be, when it's in a liquefied form, it becomes a cryogenic. Carbon monoxide can be liquefied, as well as that's the compressed gas numbers. And again, it just increases the volume of material, meaning that you have to take the action that's mentioned. In summary, the data indicates that there are a lot of carbon monoxide incidents, and it does represent a significant hazard. 400 people dying, we ought to pay attention. The numbers of folks that get sick, again, at 4,000 is pretty amazing. 80,000 calls per year indicates most fire departments in suburban and urban communities are going to attend a carbon monoxide event or two or more each and every year. It's a double threat. Not only does it have the potential of killing you because of toxicity, which I know that Doc will speak to, but it also becomes a problem as it relates to flammability and explosive potential produced during the combustion process, particularly incomplete combustion, and fire and rescue operations, hazardous identification, again, using some type of air monitoring device is important. And then don't forget to track your hazards, as we discussed. With this, we're going to take questions at the very end. Doc, you're up next. Dr. Augustine, again, tremendous person's going to enlighten us on the emergency medical response.
Chief Rubin, thank you very much. Can you confirm you can hear me, sir?
Loud and clear, sir. I hope you can hear me loud and clear, Doc.
Very good. We're lunching and learning today, and I learn every time I listen to Chief Rubin. So thanks to all of you for being here. The next portion of this, which Chief Rubin will help me drive here, is the medical portion of carbon monoxide and what fire engineers would want to know about this process. Next slide. Go ahead, Chief. Yeah. I'm going to start with a case presentation, and it is a young male who walks into the emergency department. He's concerned because he's been inhaling a concrete sealant. They're polishing concrete in a large warehouse at work, and he's complaining of chest pain and dizziness. And one of his primary complaints is of dizziness. He thinks he has a little bit of a headache. He is not nauseated. And he's taken into a cardiac room, and the cardiac room is the site of his initial workup, which the nurses thought would be a cardiac event. Let me all right. Could you all confirm that you're seeing my screen at this point?
Yes, sir.
Very good. All right.
Yes,
So
sir.
we have a cardiac patient who's been inhaling concrete sealant at work that day. In fact, this is one of the great imitators, and an issue for firefighters at a very significant level is carbon monoxide exposure can be misinterpreted as a number of other things. Those become very high visibility cases, and those cases can result in headlines like you're seeing here, where someone thought it was the flu in one or more persons. And then obviously the risk to our firefighters is not only carbon monoxide, but cyanide and a couple of other toxic twins that come in our products of combustion. Incomplete hydrocarbon burning, so from a variety of well-known sources, and some that are a little bit less known, but certainly are present. And this is the time of the year when we see these, and individuals who are trying a variety of ways to stay warm, and thinking that it's safe to, for example, use a hydrocarbon powered heater inside their house without any ventilation. The carbon monoxide poisoning, I bring you these levels as relative levels, where we begin to think in tens. But let's just say there's nothing exact about any of these levels. And we have seen people unconscious at very low levels, and people where the meters are giving us high levels, or the blood work is giving us high levels. And they're still, if you will, able to think a little more clearly than you would expect. Nonetheless, in keeping with our engineering head, we kind of think in terms of tens. So under a 10% carbon monoxide level in your blood, we believe that you will have relatively minor symptoms, including a headache and perhaps the beginning of shortness of breath. Between 10 and 20% is where enough of the carbon monoxide is occupying space on your hemoglobin that it is causing your lungs to have to work quicker to supply enough oxygen to the tissues that are waiting for it. When we're talking about carbon monoxide, and I'll repeat this later, we have to make sure that we know what meter we are talking about. When it comes to humans, the meter that we're worried about is the level of carbon monoxide in the bloodstream. That level is determined by getting a sampling of blood, or using a light meter to go through a finger and look at what's going on in the hemoglobin that's running through your capillaries, and determining what percentage of hemoglobin is occupied by carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide attracts itself to the hemoglobin, and it attaches more firmly than oxygen can. It then goes into a different shape that is measurable on our meters, whether that blood is pulled out and measured in a CO oximeter outside the body, or measured through the capillaries when it's still inside the body. So a 0 to 10% reading indicates that less than 10% of the hemoglobin is occupied by CO. When we get to 10 to 20, that's beginning to impact a lot of your red cells and a lot of their hemoglobin carrying capability. And it's reducing the supply of oxygen that is going to the tissues that need it. At about 20% is where we begin to see significant signs that the brain is not getting sufficient amount of oxygen and is beginning to impact have an impact from the carbon monoxide that's being delivered and then poisoning the cells in the central nervous system. At the 20 to 29% level, we will typically see very significant dizziness, nausea, fatigue, and getting to the point where we have altered level of consciousness. Above 30%, we clearly see the altered level of consciousness, and about 40%, typically the patients are either seizing or unconscious. Some of you are aware of very famous cases where people were pulled out of carbon monoxide environments unresponsive, and their levels came back down to very low levels. I've dealt with a couple of those cases, one of them from an overnight in a car that was accidentally running, and then I'm familiar with the case of the coal miner that was pulled out. And when initial carbon monoxide levels were looked at in the blood, they were low. What we believe happens in those cases is the carbon monoxide gets sucked off the hemoglobin and into the tissues, where it is continuing to be very destructive to tissues, particularly central nervous system tissues and cardiovascular tissues. And actually the blood level begins to drop. So for those of you who do investigations and are involved in these cases actively, unconscious with a low CO level does not rule out carbon monoxide as the primary poison. And in a few of these cases, they've achieved national notoriety because somebody said, hey, that blood level is low, but it's misleading me. That's still the problem. And when they're put into a hyperbaric chamber, the individuals wake up. And so we have to look at these CO levels as being good indicators in short-term exposure environment, and what would be, if you will, on the upside of the curve of getting sick from that poison, and not necessarily on the downside. There's another piece here that I want you to all notice is missing. There's nothing about cherry red skin in the symptom list. And that is because cherry red skin is a finding in the coroner's on the coroner's table, and not in the acute fire exposure situation. So we're not looking for skin changes to tell us who is suffering the effects of carbon monoxide exposure. All right, so if we will, we treat carbon monoxide on a spectrum. Almost all of that spectrum is based on the clinical condition of the patient. And so a patient who is having relatively minor symptoms, we bring them out. If we have the carbon monoxide measuring capability, we get a level on them, and we get a level from the environment. We then make a decision about treatment, and that treatment could include either room air or breathing air or supplemental oxygen. And that oxygen can go from cannula level oxygen through to non-rebreather oxygen through to hyperbaric delivery of oxygen. So our screening priorities in the fire EMS system are to look for those that potentially are poisoned, identify if that poison is carbon monoxide. If so, what do we need to do immediately to begin to resolve it? Room air treatment, which the patient then is taking in ambient air oxygen. Over time, they're getting the oxygen onto the hemoglobin, displacing the carbon monoxide and exhaling it. And in many cases, and many of you know, you're breathing in carbon monoxide in a variety of circumstances every day, and it doesn't require any further treatment. Symptomatic patients, we typically will immediately begin trying to flush their systems with higher flow oxygen, and then begin to present a larger amount of oxygen to their lungs and therefore into their plasma. That larger amount of oxygen then can displace carbon monoxide off of the hemoglobin. And then again, carbon monoxide doesn't hang around, then it's exhaled and gone. In our situation where we run across products of combustion, particularly those that are nitrogen rich, we can also have cyanide, hydrogen cyanide, as an additional toxin. Those patients typically are feeling the effects of cyanide in additional ways. That is additional layers of headache, additional shortness of breath, and then additional levels of altered level of consciousness. Their blood pressure begins to drop. And one of the kind of cardinal ways of differentiating cyanide from carbon monoxide is cyanide will reduce blood pressure and can produce a shock-like state, in which case we think through, and it's not on the program here, but we would think through then the specific treatment that we have for cyanide poisoning, particularly in firefighters, particularly those who've been battling fires in circumstances where there's rich environments producing hydrogen cyanide. All right, leading cause of poisoning, and any of the numbers that we give you underestimate the true effect of carbon monoxide. Another problem that has been found in recent years is long-term negative effects on the central nervous system and the cardiovascular system. And in fact, they have found in people who've had significant poisonings by carbon monoxide that they're later at risk for cardiovascular events, including MIs and strokes, and alterations of their blood pressure that ultimately cause organ damage in other areas. We have the ability now to do much better testing in the field. So if we can talk about a couple of the CO detection methods, and it's really, really important that we keep the CO detection terminology correct. We have, as Chief Rubin already mentioned, ambient air meters that can do either continuous or intermittent sampling of the air and give us a level of carbon monoxide in parts per million. These have now been made quite portable and quite easy to read and interpret. When it comes to the human being, we have to detect CO in different ways. The earliest way that we could do this was essentially a breathalyzer test that allowed a meter to detect carbon monoxide as it was being exhaled. So used very much like a breathalyzer, you would ask the individual, the patient, the firefighter, to breathe out a full breath through, getting all of the end exhalation volume through a meter, and then it measures carbon monoxide in the airstream, much of the same as it does in the ambient air meter. Here's what I found. That is one method of detecting carbon monoxide in the blood. And our second is the new meters that will be placed on the finger. So a pulse co-oximeter placed on a finger, getting a good reading on a capillary bed, and looking at that, looking for the signature of carboxyhemoglobin and comparing it in percentages to what it sees with regular oxygenated hemoglobin. So that's a non-invasive tool, and the meter probe is placed on the finger. Now this is important. We found out through years of service with these meters that number one, you can blind them, particularly in the strobes and the brighter strobes that we have on fire equipment. So shielding it from ambient air is really important. Number two, firefighters have thick pads, dirty fingers, and in some cases very small or very thick fingernails. You can't get light through those kind of nails. So you pick a nail that provides you the best window into the capillaries. As a matter of practice, when we were doing this in the fire rehab areas, we would ask the firefighter for their non-dominant hand. In my case, it was my left hand. And we would ask for the finger that typically has the thinnest pad on it, which is your ring finger. And then we would look and make sure that we have as good a nail as is present on the hand there. And then we clip the probe on, and then I'll show you in a minute, the light goes through the nail and uses the nail as a window. And then on the other side can do the analysis of the spectrum of light that is coming through. It then can measure pulse rate, it can measure oxygen saturation, it can measure carbon monoxide saturation, and those are the things that we need to do fire rehab, for example. So the rule of this is rule in or rule out carbon monoxide toxicity, and then allow ongoing rescuer safety. So this is the look of the CO probe. Again, the probe is placed so that the wire side, which is the site that generates the light, is on the nail side of the finger, and then it passes the light through the finger and is picked up by a sensor on the other side. So non-dominant hand, ring finger if it's got a good nail, or another nail if you can find a better nail. And we can use these on the toes if the toenail isn't too thick. In children, sometimes their toes provide a better window onto the child's capillaries than their hands. And so that's the necessary placement of a carbon monoxide oximeter. In screening, we focus on atypical presentations, not, our heater was malfunctioning, I left the car running, there was a fire inside the building and I was unconscious and in there for a while. But in fact, I'm weak, I'm dizzy, I passed out, we all have the flu. Those are kind of the trigger words that would lead you to look for carbon monoxide. If the levels are low, we want to make sure those are true readings. And in some cases, we take one of the canaries. So one of the people who are exposed, send them to the hospital with the story of, we're looking for a toxin. Our field meters are not picking up anything on our gas or anything in the carbon monoxide oximetry readings, but we're concerned, and is there something in the emergency departments you can test for to give us an idea of what the exposure may have been. In many cases, the hospital will do their work. They will find no CO either. They will identify another source from other work that is done on the patient, or they will say, we found nothing, and the fire department will say, hey, we found the source, and it was a leaking, and then we went into a room and the LELs were high. So in any case, we can use the patients and the ambient air in various parts of a building structure or vehicle to find sources. Don't forget, the bigger the building, the more potential there is for pockets of CO to be hidden in the building and causing people to have problems. This is a warehouse issue where they have a single propane powered tow motor that's operating in a certain building, and the people in that part of the building are getting sick. The people in the rest of the building are not getting sick. And if you go into the wrong part of the building with an ambient air meter and you get 0 readings, you're in the wrong part of the building. And in fact, if you go, you have to sometimes ask a lot of questions and be following a supervisor through the building to find out where the people were that were getting sick. And then you go there and you know, what are we using here? Well, we were using a propane heater. Well, we were using a concrete stripper. Well, we were using a tow motor. And you get some readings, and then you flip that machine on or ask them to turn it on the way they were using it, and it's pumping out, 10,000 parts per million as it's being operated. So this requires some detective work. And again, it's really important if you have individuals that are sick that you find a source, you prevent further patients from being exposed to it, and sometimes they're animals and other things. And as well, then being able to take care of the source, whatever it happens to be, so that the tow motor gets pulled out of the building and tagged out so that it's not causing others to get ill. All right, the appropriate treatment and triage algorithm then looks something like this. Under 10, we typically are using ambient air and allowing the patients to breathe out on their own. Above 10, we are putting on supplemental oxygen. Above 10, we're considering transport, particularly in pregnant women and in children who have a higher sensitivity to carbon monoxide. The treatment of the scene managed, as Chief Rubin has already mentioned. Otherwise, it is begin treatment in the field and then consideration to the closest, most appropriate facility. And in that, altered level of consciousness is a key driver of who's going to a hyperbaric facility. Pediatric patients and pregnant females with levels over 10 to 15% really are candidates to go to the hyperbaric center and to be put in the chamber and given a dive or two. to make sure that they have taken all of the carbon monoxide they can out of the system, and then do ongoing monitoring to whether it's the fetus or the child or the adult who'd been unconscious to make sure that they're recovering. We think CO is a very important part of fire rehab. And as mentioned already, our protocol is pulse rate, oxygen saturation, and carbon monoxide level. The fire rehab protocol that we've written now 30 years ago, pulse rate under 120, you can go back in service. Your oxygen level has to be above 92%. Your CO level has to be below 5%, or you're not able to return to duty, and we got to find out the source. Many of you know of cases of people who've been in the fires and they just don't like to put their mask on, and they've been operating there, or they're doing overhaul, and they're getting a little symptomatic, and they're getting a little goofy or dizzy, or they're at risk not only to themselves but other people. And we have to pull those people out and find a way to not let them return into the scene unless properly PPE'd. And then we can report all that on an incident rehab worksheet. I'm just going to make you aware, as we're improving technology, we're adding more meters, and make sure that we keep those meters in appropriate order in our brains, that we're looking at ppm when it comes to ambient air and percent hemoglobin when it comes to the humans that are exposed. And as we add more of these, and as we add things like carbon dioxide detectors, and now after COVID, we have carbon dioxide meters looking at air movement through buildings and saying when there are high CO2 readings in buildings, it means not enough ventilation is going on and people are at higher risk of infectious diseases. So we have CO2 detectors for end tidal use on patients who we're looking at cardiac and respiratory problems in. So keep your carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and other meters in mind as you're thinking through. There's obviously other uses of carbon monoxide readings in boaters. Some of you are small aircraft pilots and know what a risk carbon monoxide is in that setting, and obviously in the industrial setting. And we have future home monitoring systems. Some people are proposing not only ambient air meters, but also personal meters that can be used in the home, so that if, for example, you have symptoms of headache and dizziness, that you'll be able to do your own reading. We don't have a dive table yet. In the future, one may be developed related to CO. Let's go to our and finish up with our case presentation, which was a 26-year-old who's in the cardiac room with chest pain and lightheadedness. His cardiac workup is negative, but when the CO meter is placed on his left ring finger, rings out at 25%. 25%, and he's been out of that building for 30 minutes while being transported from his work site to the hospital. He's still at 25%. Treatment is changed to high flow oxygen. And the next steps are what? Well, from the emergency department, our next step is to call his supervisor, who is at home, but who knows who's still working in the building, and calling the local fire department to say, you have the building that's poisoned. The worker indicates that it's XXX. He was working in this area of that big warehouse. He was working with, as it turned out, not just concrete sealant, but a concrete stripper that was propane powered. And when the fire department gets there, they use the information came from the emergency department, flipped on the concrete stripper, found that it was blowing about 10,000 parts per million as it was operating. They evacuated that area, they ventilated it, and reduced risk to all future people. So, CO, with Chief Rubin, we have a significant and controllable health risk. Symptoms can be varied. We worry about the effects on people who have more frequent exposure. That includes our firefighters. And we have new tools to help us both in ambient air monitoring and in patient monitoring. Chief Rubin, I'm going to quit the screen share at this point, And I will send it back over to you as the moderator for our question and answers.
What a tremendous presentation. And I think Dr. Augustine not only brings contemporary information, but we get a little bit of a look at what's going to happen in the future. So on behalf of everyone today, Doc, thank you, thank you, thank you. It's at this point where we'll take questions. If you don't mind unmuting your volume, tell us who you are, where you're from, and shoot away. We've got about 10 minutes left. And Doc, there is one question for you waiting in the chat box.
All right. Jay Lane, while studies support the use of CPAP with 100% to reduce half-life, no literature that speaks to really CPAP use. And that's very true. The addition of CPAP brings a continuous positive flow. So whether you're breathing 21% oxygen that's coming at you at 40 miles an hour, which is essentially what CPAP is, or you're breathing 21 or 30% or another percent, it's really the percent oxygen that's going to determine how much of that oxygen gets delivered into the bloodstream, that oxygen displacing carbon monoxide and letting you get rid of it. So we know that there is some indication it reduces half-life. We do not know yet whether that reduces the overall level of poisoning and whether outcomes are improved. We simply don't have literature on that yet. And most places still, for the significantly poisoned patient, peds, pregnant, or the ones that have had altered level of consciousness, they'll be taken to a place and put in a dive chamber. Thank you.
Doc, you have another question from north of the border from Chief Dave Robertson. Chief Robertson asks, blood pressure alterations has a symptom, hyper or hypo? What should a firefighter look for?
Okay. Blood pressure alterations in general with carbon monoxide would be a slight decrease, not significant. If there's significant reduction in blood pressure, we immediately go to cyanide and think that that the addition of cyanide to the poisoning combination from products of combustion, it's really cyanide. And at that point, most emergency physicians at this point are going to begin the treatment for cyanide poisoning at the point where someone is hypotensive and has altered level of consciousness, having been exposed to products of combustion. It takes a little while for us to get cyanide levels back in most hospitals, and so the treatment will be presumptive looking for cyanide if the firefighter or other victim is hypotensive. As well, you're going to do a 12 lead EKG to make sure that they didn't, as a result of carbon monoxide, have an MI or another big cardiovascular event. Good question. Thank you.
Doc, there's another question in the queue from Karen off of her iPad. Since cyanide is coexisting byproduct in combustion, what are your thoughts about using the cyano kits?
Yeah, so hydroxycobalamin is a wonderful product. It does take people through a valley of hell, and unless you really believe that there is cyanide present, it would be wise not to give us the hydroxycobalamin treatment if you don't find significant signs of cyanide poisoning. So that would be a significant alteration in the level of consciousness, a history, if they're still conscious, of very significant headache, other signs like ischemic changes on an EKG, and in particular hypotensive, so decrease in blood pressure, points you towards cyanide. Lacking those things, it would not be wise to prophylactically think that a cyano kit or hydroxycobalamin will help the patient.
Doc, softball for me comes from Chief Dan Dunn in the Shore House in Wildwood, and that's about the forms that I showed. If everyone would, if you go into your chat, President Hannafin put the link to the two forms. The front of the form is a tracker, and what I had done with those forms is they're on pads of 50. forms on each pad so that you can track the information, then flip it over and see what the indicators are by the NIOSH requirements based on the percentage that you're seeing. So thanks to Chief Dunn and the members of Wildwood Shorehouse. Other questions? We've got just a few more minutes left, about 4 more minutes. You can type a question in the chat box, or you can unmute and ask the doc or I.
Chief Rubin, you're in the overhaul phase, and somebody walks in with a meter, holds it in a well-ventilated area of the building, and pronounces a 0 carbon monoxide level, says safe for everybody to take your masks off. What do you think?
Probably not. We need to consider the fact that in different areas it could be spiked. We also have to consider things like aerosolized dust of all types, particularly any type of construction or masonry, the potential of breathing something in and never getting it out of your lungs exists as well. So we would urge folks to make sure that they keep on their respiratory protection just about until the very end of the event. Hopefully safety officer has started the process of ensuring that there's multiple, if not perhaps ongoing air monitoring that's occurring long before we would take off our SCBA. Great question, Doc, as always. Any other questions? We've got about 3 minutes now left, at least time for one last question. Well, in summary, what a great day today. It looks like there's quite a lot of folks listening in. We truly appreciate that. I think the IFE is going to continue to build on the lunch and learn. Again, I'll give acknowledgement to Chief Becky Prince and the work she, as along with the committee, has done. So with that said, a great day. I hope this information has helped. I know perhaps at some point Chief Boutwell may describe how you can bring down the video that was presented today with the idea of using it for a company drill. Doc, that leaves the best for last. That would be you. Closing comments, please. And you can even give us a weather report from sunny Orlando.
Sunny Orlando, 90 degrees today. The rest of the country's in CO poisoning risk area. Any of those products of combustion, guys, take it easy and stay safe.
Excuse me, Chief Boutwell.
Thank you, sir. Thank you to both of you. What a great presentation. That is absolutely valuable to our profession. I'd like to also thank everyone that signed on today. This is our largest crowd thus far. So thank you very much. Don't forget the link that I've posted to put your name as you'd like to see on a certificate and the email that you would like to receive it at. And thank you guys again.
Thanks, Dennis. Thanks, Doc.
Truly our honor. Thanks, everyone. What a great group. Even you, Mark Nugent. What a great